Sarah Bennett pressed her last coin into her palm and stared at the ranch gate like it was the entrance to a life she hadn't earned. Her dress was torn at the shoulder. Her shoes had given out 3 miles back. She had nothing left. No money, no pride, no plan. And then a little girl no older than 7 pushed through the gate, looked straight up at her, with eyes full of something desperate and holy, and whispered words that stopped the whole world cold. Please, be our mama. If this story moves you the way it moves me, subscribe to this channel right now. Hit that notification bell and follow Sarah's journey all the way to the end. And drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The wagon driver didn't say a word when he let her down. He just set her worn leather bag on the dirt, clicked his tongue at the horses, and rolled back down the road like he was relieved to be done with the whole business. Sarah Bennett stood there in the full blaze of a Wyoming summer and watched him go. She didn't call after him, didn't beg him to wait. She had learned a long time ago that begging only made things worse, and the kind of men who drove wagons for coin weren't the kind who turned around out of mercy. The heat pressed down on her like a hand. Not the gentle warmth of a summer back east where shade came easy and green things grew without asking. This was different. This was a heat that meant it. The kind that dried your mouth before you finished your first breath, that turned the dirt under your feet the color of old bone, that made the whole world look like it was waiting for something to catch fire. She picked up her bag. It was lighter than it should have been for a woman who had packed her entire life into it. But most of her life had already been taken piece by piece, year by year, until what remained fit into a space about the size of her broken pride. The ranch ahead of her was not what she'd imagined. In the letter, it had sounded reasonable, modest but decent. A working ranch in Wyoming Territory, operated by one James Walker widower, father of 2, seeking a woman of sound character and practical disposition to help manage a household. The matchmaking agency had used words like established and comfortable and stable. They had not mentioned the listing fence posts. They had not mentioned the barn with the patched roof or the well that had clearly been repaired with whatever wood was nearest and cheapest. They had not mentioned the 2 children standing at the gate watching her like she was either a miracle or a mistake, and they hadn't decided which yet. The older one, a boy maybe 10, had his arms crossed over his chest and his jaw set in a way that reminded her uncomfortably of her own father. He had that look men learned early in hard places. The look that said, I am not going to make this easy for you. The younger one was a girl. She was maybe 7. Brown hair pulled into 2 uneven braids that someone had tried to make neat and hadn't quite managed. A dress that had been washed so many times, the blue had gone gray. And eyes, enormous, serious eyes, that were fixed on Sarah with an intensity that made her want to take a step back. Sarah didn't take a step back. She walked forward. She pushed through the gate, set her bag down in the dust, crouched to the girl's level and said, "Hello there." The girl didn't answer right away. She studied Sarah the way a child studies something she has wanted for a very long time, but is afraid to touch in case it disappears. Then she said very quietly, so quietly, that Sarah had to lean in to hear it over the dry summer wind, "Please, be our mama." Sarah felt those words land somewhere in her chest she hadn't known was still open. She didn't answer. She couldn't. Her throat had gone tight, and her eyes had gone stupid, and she was suddenly desperately aware that she was crouching in the dirt in a torn dress in front of 2 children she had never met, in a place she had never been trying not to cry in a way that would embarrass all 3 of them. "Emily." The boy's voice was flat. "Don't say that." The girl. Emily didn't look at her brother. She kept her eyes on Sarah. "Why not?" she said. "Because she just got here." So you can't just ask a stranger to be your mama." "Why not?" The boy Noah turned his head away like the conversation had insulted him. He stared out at the dry fields with the practiced 1,000-yard stare of someone who had decided the world was best observed from a safe distance. Sarah straightened up slowly. Her knees ached. Her feet ached. Everything ached. She looked at Noah. "What's your name?" she asked. He didn't answer. "His name's Noah," Emily said helpfully. He talks. He just doesn't like to. Fair enough, Sarah said. She picked up her bag again and looked toward the house. The front door was open. There was no one standing in it. She had been told James Walker would meet her at the gate. He had not. She found him around the back of the house, crouched beside a section of fence that had collapsed in on itself. He had his hat pushed back and his sleeves rolled to the elbow, and he was working a piece of wire through a post with the careful, controlled movement of a man who had learned that impatience only cost him more time in the end. He heard her coming, she knew he did, because his shoulders shifted slightly, but he didn't look up. "Mr. Walker," she said. "Miss Bennett?" He turned the wire once more. "You made it." "I did." "Wagon give you trouble?" "No." He stood then finally and looked at her. He was taller than she'd expected, dark-eyed. A face that had been weathered into something angular and still like wood, left too long in the sun. He was not an unkind-looking man. He was not a warm-looking man either. He was simply a man who had used up whatever surplus emotion he'd started with and was operating now on the practical reserve that remained. His eyes moved over her, her torn shoulder seam, her ruined shoes, the way she was holding her bag, and then came back to her face. "You look like you walked part of the way," he said. "Last few miles," she said. "Wagon driver wouldn't come down the side road." Something moved in his expression. Not apology. Something more complicated than that. "Should have warned you about Hicks," he said. "Charges extra for the detour." He didn't mention that. No, he wouldn't. He pulled a rag from his back pocket and wiped his hands. "House is open. Emily'll show you where things are." He turned back to the fence. Sarah stood there for a moment. She had traveled 11 days to get here. 11 days on coaches and wagons, and one memorable stretch on a flatbed supply cart that smelled like turpentine and wet wool. She had slept badly in 3 different boarding houses, eaten food she couldn't identify in 2 of them, and spent the last hour of her journey on foot in shoes that had never been designed for dirt roads. She had arrived to no greeting, no welcome, and a fence that required more immediate attention than she did. She turned and walked back to the house. Emily was waiting for her on the porch. "Papa's always fixing things," the girl said without any particular judgment in her voice. "He fixes things when he doesn't know what else to do." "That's a useful quality," Sarah said. Emily considered this. "Mama used to say it meant he was scared," she said. "But I think she was teasing him." Sarah looked at the child for a moment. "How long ago did your mama pass?" she asked gently. 2 years, Emily said. "Noah doesn't like to talk about it. Papa doesn't either. But I think about her a lot." She paused. "Is that okay?" "That's more than okay," Sarah said. "That's exactly right." Emily seemed satisfied with that. She pushed the front door open wider and said, "Come on. I'll show you where everything is." The house was clean. That surprised her. It was sparse, the kind of spare that came from not having much. Not from preference, but it was clean and ordered in a way that suggested someone worked at it consistently. The kitchen had dry herbs hanging from the ceiling beams. The floor was swept. The dishes were stacked. "Do you do the cleaning?" Sarah asked. "Me and Noah," Emily said. "Papa does the outside. We do the inside." She stopped in front of a door at the end of the short hallway. "This is your room." She opened it. It was a small room with a window that faced east and a bed with a quilt that had been made from many different fabrics and was beautiful in the way that things are beautiful when someone has used everything they had to make them. There was a small table, a wash basin, a hook on the wall for hanging clothes. It was the most private space Sarah had been in 11 days. She set her bag down very carefully, like she was afraid to disturb something. "It was the guest room," Emily said. "But we don't get guests, so it's just been empty." She looked at Sarah with those serious eyes. "Do you like it?" "I do," Sarah said. "Very much." Emily nodded, satisfied. "Good," she said. And then, very matter-of-factly, "I asked Papa to put fresh water in the basin this morning. In case you were tired from the road. Sarah turned to look at her. You asked him to do that, she said. Yes, ma'am. When did you ask him? 3 days ago, Emily said. When we knew you were coming? Sarah looked at the basin, at the clean water sitting in it. She thought about a 7-year-old girl, one who had been without a mother for 2 years, thinking 3 days in advance about whether a stranger arriving tired from a long journey might want clean water to wash her face. She had to look away. Thank you, Emily, she said. You're welcome, Emily said. And then she left, closing the door softly behind her, and Sarah stood alone in the small room with the east-facing window and pressed both hands flat against the wall and breathed. Dinner that evening was the first real test. Noah set the table without being asked. He did it the way he seemed to do everything efficiently, silently, without making eye contact with anyone. Sarah watched him count the plates and lay them down and thought this boy has been managing his grief by making himself useful, and he's been doing it for 2 years, and nobody's taught him yet that he doesn't have to. James came in from outside, washed up, and sat at the head of the table. Sarah had made what she could from what was in the kitchen: beans with dried meat, cornbread, a pot of coffee that she hoped was strong enough to make up for the simplicity of the rest. She wasn't a trained cook, she was a teacher. But she'd grown up in a household where money was careful and meals were practical, and she knew how to make something from not much. She set the food on the table and sat down. Nobody said anything for a moment. Then Emily said, "It smells good." "Thank you," Sarah said. Noah looked at his plate, said nothing. James picked up his fork, and that seemed to give everyone else permission to do the same. The meal passed in pieces of silence, broken by small things. Emily talked. She talked the way water moves through a place it's familiar with around the edges of things, filling in gaps. She told Sarah about the chickens, 6 of them, one named Dolly, who was mean about the creek at the back of the property, good for fishing in spring, mostly dry by August, about her friend Clara, who lived 6 miles away and came to visit sometimes when her father could spare the horse. Noah ate and said nothing. James ate and said nothing. But when Sarah reached across the table to refill his coffee without asking, purely out of the habit of a woman who had grown up in a household where the coffee pot was always being passed, he looked up. "Thank you," he said. It was the first thing he'd said at the table. It cost him something to say it. She could tell by the way his jaw moved slightly after, like he was recalibrating. "Of course," she said. Later, after the children were in bed, James came to the kitchen doorway. Sarah was washing the dishes. He stood there for a moment, and she was aware of him. The way you're aware of weather, not by looking at it directly, but by the change it creates in the air around you. "You don't have to do that tonight," he said. "You've had a long road." "Dishes don't wait," she said. A pause. "No," he said. "They don't." She heard him move to the table and sit down, not at the head of it, but at the side, which surprised her. She didn't turn around. "Emily liked the cornbread," he said. "It was a little dry," she said. "It was fine." She rinsed the last dish and set it to dry, and finally turned around. He was looking at the table, not at her. His hands were flat on the wood. He had the look of a man about to say something he had rehearsed poorly. "I should have been at the gate," he said. "Yes," she said. "You should have." He looked up, then, slightly surprised, she thought that she'd agreed so plainly. "The fence gave way this morning," he said. "I didn't want to leave it." "I understand that," she said. "A ranch doesn't stop for introductions." "No." He was quiet a moment. "But you still should have been met properly. I'm sorry for it." She studied him. The apology had been direct with no softening around it. She respected that. "Apology accepted," she said. He nodded. And then, after another pause, "I want to be clear about something." "Go ahead," she said. "This arrangement," he said carefully. "It's practical. I need help with the house, with the children. I can't manage all of it, and the ranch both, and the children need someone consistent." He paused. "What I'm saying is, I'm not expecting anything beyond that. What you signed on for is what's expected. Nothing more, nothing less." Sarah looked at him for a long moment. She had prepared herself for many versions of this conversation on the 11-day journey west. She had imagined coldness and awkwardness and the particular discomfort of two strangers trying to negotiate the borders of a shared space. She had not expected such a cleanly honest statement of terms from a man who barely spoke. "I appreciate you saying that plainly," she said. "It's the only way I know how to say things," he said. "That," she said, "is a quality I respect." He seemed almost uncertain what to do with that. He stood, pushed the chair back, and said, "There's a list of things that need doing around the house. Emily'll show you in the morning. If something's unclear, ask me." "I will," she said. He nodded once, picked up his hat from the hook, and walked out. Sarah stood in the kitchen alone. She looked at the clean dishes drying in the rack, at the coffee cup he'd left behind, at the door he'd walked through. She had come west with nothing. A ruined dress, a light bag, and the last shred of a life that had fallen apart back east in ways she hadn't told the matchmaking agency about and wasn't planning to tell James Walker about any time soon. She had come here because she had run out of other options. But standing in that kitchen in the quiet of a Wyoming night, listening to the sound of the dry wind moving through the grass outside the window, she felt something she hadn't expected to feel. Not hope exactly. Not yet. Something smaller than hope. Something that lived underneath it. The faint, fragile sense that perhaps this broken place with this silent man and his two grieving children and his collapsing fence might be, if she was very careful and very patient and very honest, the beginning of something that wasn't nothing. She turned off the lamp and went to bed in this room with the east-facing window and the hand-sewn quilt and the basin of clean water that a 7-year-old girl had thought to arrange 3 days in advance. And she did not cry. Not that night. The morning came hard and early. Sarah heard the rooster before she heard anything else, and then she heard boots, heavy, deliberate, moving across the floor above her toward the stairs. James Walker did not ease into his days. He arrived at them like a man who had already decided the day owed him something and intended to collect. She was already dressed when Emily knocked on her door. "Papa wants to know if you take coffee," the girl said. "I do," Sarah said. "Strong if there's enough." Emily nodded seriously, as though this were important information she intended to deliver with accuracy. Sarah followed her to the kitchen and found James standing at the stove with his back to the room, pouring coffee into 2 cups, with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done it 10,000 times alone. He set 1 cup on the table without turning around. "Sit," he said, not rudely, just plainly. Sarah sat. Noah was already at the table, eating his eyes down, working through a bowl of oats like it was a task that required full concentration. He had not looked up when she came in. She did not push it. "There's a list," James said, turning finally and sliding a piece of paper across the table toward her. "Things that need doing, in order of what matters most." She picked it up and read it. It was written in a hand that was careful and deliberate, the handwriting of a man who didn't write often but took it seriously when he did. The list had 12 items: mending the curtains in the children's room, restocking the dry goods he'd written the amounts she'd need and where the nearest supply store was 6 miles east, organizing the root cellar, checking the children's boots for fit before the fall. She set the paper down. "You wrote this before I arrived," she said. He looked at her. "Yes." "How long before?" A pause. 2 weeks. She thought about that. A man who had spent 2 weeks writing a list of 12 things for a woman he had never met in handwriting that was careful and deliberate. A man who fixed fences when he didn't know what else to do. A man whose 7-year-old daughter had thought to put fresh water in the basin 3 days in advance. "All right," she said. "I'll start with the root cellar." He seemed like he expected an argument and wasn't sure what to do without one. "Root cellar's in bad shape," he said. "Took on water in the spring. Some of the shelving came loose." "I'll manage," she said. He picked up his hat. "Noah'll show you where it is if you need it." Noah did not look up from his oats. "Noah," James said. The boy looked up. Show Miss Bennett the root cellar if she asks. Noah looked at Sarah for exactly 1 second. That same flat measuring look she'd seen at the gate the day before, and then looked back at his bowl. Yes, sir, he said. James walked out. Emily immediately took his chair, propped her chin on both fists, and looked at Sarah like she was the most interesting thing that had happened in years. What are you going to do first? She asked. Eat breakfast, Sarah said. Then the root cellar. Can I help? Have you got school? Emily's face did something complicated. We don't have a real school, she said. We had a teacher, but she left in April. Papa's been having Noah teach me. Sarah looked at Noah. Noah looked at the table. How's that going? Sarah asked. He's better at numbers than words, Emily said diplomatically. I can hear you, Noah said without heat. I know, Emily said. Sarah looked between the two of them. Then she looked at the list James had written. Then she picked up her coffee and said very carefully, I was a school teacher, back east. The kitchen went quiet. Emily sat up straight. A real one. A real one. Emily turned to Noah with an expression of profound triumph. Noah looked at Sarah for the first time that morning, really looked at her the way he'd been carefully not doing, and something shifted in his face. Not warmth. Not yet. But the slight grudging recalibration of someone who has received new information that complicates a decision they'd already made. He looked back at his bowl. But something had changed. Sarah drank her coffee and didn't push it. The root cellar was worse than James had described. 2 of the main shelves had pulled away from the wall entirely and taken their contents with them. Crocks of preserved vegetables shattered on the earthen floor, dried goods scattered, and some of them ruined by the spring damp that had come up through the ground and hadn't fully dried. It smelled like soil and old vinegar and something sweet that had gone past sweet. Sarah stood at the bottom of the stairs and took it in. Then she rolled up her sleeves and started. She worked for 2 hours before she heard boots on the stairs behind her. She assumed it was Emily, who had been in and out all morning carrying things and asking questions, and generally being present in the way that children are when they have decided they like you and want to keep confirming it. But it wasn't Emily. It was Noah. It was... He stood at the bottom of the stairs with his arms at his sides and looked at the work she'd done, the cleared floor. The sorted goods, the broken shelf leaned against the wall, waiting to be repaired. That shelf needs new brackets, he said. I know, she said. Do you know where your father keeps his tools? Yes. Would you be willing to get the brackets? I'll hold the shelf if you put them in. He stared at her for a long moment. She kept her face neutral, kept her hands busy, didn't look at him like she was waiting for something. Okay, he said finally. He came back with the brackets and a hammer and nails, and for the next 40 minutes they worked side by side in near silence, Sarah holding the shelf level, while Noah drove the nails with a sureness that surprised her. He was 10 years old, and he handled a hammer like someone who'd been doing it for years, which she supposed he had. When the shelf was back on the wall, and holding Noah stepped back and looked at it. Good? He said. Very good, she agreed. You've got a good eye. He didn't respond to the compliment, but he didn't walk away either. He picked up one of the surviving crocks from the floor, turned it in his hands, and set it on the newly fixed shelf. Mama made these, he said. Sarah went still. She didn't say anything. She waited. She put up preserves every summer, he said. Peaches mostly, some plum. Said it was important to have something sweet in winter. He set the crock down carefully, exactly in the center of the shelf. These are the last ones. Sarah looked at the crock, at his hands, at the careful, deliberate way he had placed it. Then we'll be careful with them, she said. Noah looked at her. Something passed across his face, fast there and gone like a cloud shadow crossing dry ground. He picked up the hammer and went back upstairs without another word. But he had said it. He had said Mama. He had said these are the last ones. He had said it to her in the dark of the root cellar with his hands on something his mother had made. Sarah stood alone in the half-repaired cellar and let the weight of that sit in her chest for exactly as long as she could afford to let it. Then she went back to work. At lunch, James came in from the east field and found the table already set. He stopped in the doorway. Sarah was at the stove. Emily was telling her something about Dolly the mean chicken with intense narrative detail. Noah was at the table already seated with a book open in front of him, which was new Sarah had noticed. He'd been eating breakfast this morning without a book, which meant the book at lunch was a choice, a deliberate piece of armor. "Sit down, Papa," Emily said without looking up from what she was telling Sarah. "We're almost ready." James sat down. He looked at the table set properly with the coffee already poured, and then at Noah, who was reading, and then at Sarah's back, and then at the table again. When Sarah brought the food over and sat down, he said, "You didn't have to do lunch." "The list said the root cellar," she said. "It didn't say anything about not making lunch." "The list was about the house," he said, "not meals." "Food is the house," she said simply. He picked up his fork. Emily launched back into her story about the chicken. Noah turned a page. And James Walker sat at the head of his own table and ate a meal he hadn't made in a kitchen that smelled like coffee and cornbread and clean work, and said nothing at all. But the silence he sat in was a different quality than the silence from the morning. Less guarded. More present. Sarah noticed. She didn't let on that she noticed. But she did. The afternoon brought trouble in a shape she hadn't expected. She was in the children's room mending the curtains item 2 on the list when she heard the wagon on the road. She didn't think much of it until she heard the voice. A woman's voice carrying the particular sharp clarity of someone who had trained it to carry over distances and didn't lower it just because she was inside. "James Walker, I know you're on the property. I saw the smoke." Sarah set down the curtains and went to the window. The woman who had pulled up in the wagon was somewhere between 50 and 60, with a broad face and the bearing of someone who had spent decades being the most capable person in any room and had stopped apologizing for it. She had a younger woman beside her late 20s, fair-haired with the kind of careful prettiness that required effort to maintain in a Wyoming summer. James came from the barn. "Mrs. Aldridge," he said. His voice had gone flat in a way that was different from his usual flatness, more deliberate. "Don't Mrs. Aldridge me," the woman said. She had already climbed down from the wagon. "I came to see about the arrangement. People in town have been talking." "People in town talk about everything," James said. "They're saying you sent for a woman." Mrs. Aldridge looked around the yard with the comprehensive assessment of someone taking inventory. "A mail-order arrangement. That's my business. It becomes the community's business when it affects these children." She was already moving toward the house. "I want to meet her." James stepped in front of her. The motion was not aggressive, but it was deliberate. He planted himself between Mrs. Aldridge and the front door with the quiet certainty of a man who had made a decision and was not interested in having it reviewed. "Helen," he said, and the use of her first name clearly surprised her. "You've been kind to this family since Margaret passed. I won't forget that. But this is my home, and you do not walk into it without being invited." Mrs. Aldridge stopped. The younger woman in the wagon, Sarah would learn later, this was her niece. Clara's older sister looked between them with wide eyes. Mrs. Aldridge studied James for a moment. Then she said more quietly, "I'm not trying to interfere, James. I'm trying to make sure those children are all right." "They're all right." "How would you know you're in the fields all day?" "That's why I made the arrangement," he said. "So someone would be here. And she's suitable." Something happened in James Walker's face then that Sarah, watching from the window, couldn't fully read. It was not quite irritation, and it was not quite pride, and it lasted only a second before he shut it back down. "She's capable," he said. "She's a school teacher. The children need that." Mrs. Aldridge absorbed this. "A school teacher," she repeated. "From back east." A pause. "Well," Mrs. Aldridge straightened slightly. "That's not what I expected." "No." James said dryly. I imagine it wasn't. Sarah stepped back from the window. She had heard enough. She had not been introduced. She had not been sent for. James had handled it himself, planted himself between a formidable woman and his front door, and said she's capable. Said she's a schoolteacher. Said it with something in his voice that she couldn't name exactly but that sat differently in her chest than she expected it to. She picked up the curtains and went back to mending them. Her hands were steady, but her mind was not entirely. Mrs. Aldridge did not leave without getting what she came for. 20 minutes later, there was a knock at the children's room door, and Emily opened it to reveal both Mrs. Aldridge and James standing in the hallway. Mrs. Aldridge was wearing the expression of a woman who has agreed to something under mild duress and intends to make her own judgment about whether the agreement was wise. Miss Bennet, James said with a careful neutrality that was doing a great deal of work. This is Mrs. Helen Aldridge. She's a neighbor. 6 miles west, Mrs. Aldridge said, extending her hand. Her grip was firm and assessing. I've known this family 8 years. Sarah Bennet, Sarah said. It's a pleasure. Mrs. Aldridge looked her over. Not rudely, but thoroughly, in the way of a woman who had learned that first impressions were data points that ought to be collected carefully. Her eyes went to the curtain in Sarah's hands, to the needle and thread. To the organized room behind her. Sarah had straightened the children's things while she worked, put the books in a better stack, hung a jacket that had been left on the floor. You're mending the curtains, Mrs. Aldridge said. They needed it. The list, Emily said helpfully from behind Mrs. Aldridge. Miss Sarah has a list. Mrs. Aldridge looked at Emily. Something in her face softened in spite of itself. I see, she said. She was a schoolteacher, Emily added. Back east. A real one. Is that so? Mrs. Aldridge looked back at Sarah. It is, Sarah said. Mrs. Aldridge was quiet for a moment. Then, my niece Clara is your Emily's age. They're friends, you may have heard. I have, Sarah said. Emily speaks very well of her. Clara hasn't had proper instruction since April. Mrs. Aldridge paused, and it was the pause of a woman who is preparing to say something that costs her something. If you were willing, once you're settled, I'd pay fair rate for Clara to join any lessons you might arrange. The room was quiet. James was looking at the wall. Emily had gone very still, in the way children go still, when something important is happening that they understand instinctively, even if they don't have the words for it. I'd be glad to, Sarah said. Mrs. Aldridge nodded once, sharp and final, the way she did everything. Then I won't take more of your time. She turned to James. She seems capable. That's what I said, James said. Mrs. Aldridge fixed him with a look that contained about 40 years of knowing men who were too stubborn to admit things. I know what you said, she said. I'm saying I agree with it. She left. The room exhaled. Emily turned to Sarah with enormous eyes and said in a whisper, loud enough to be heard from the yard, She never agrees with Papa. Emily, James said. It's true, Emily said. Sarah turned back to the curtain so that James couldn't see her face. But Noah, she noticed, had appeared silently in the doorway. She hadn't heard him come up the stairs, and he was looking at the space where Mrs. Aldridge had been standing with an expression that was for the first time not closed. He looked at Sarah. She looked at him. He said nothing. He turned and went back downstairs. But the looking had happened, and they both knew it. The first real crack appeared that evening, not in the house, not in the fence, in Noah. Sarah was at the kitchen table after supper, working through a primer she'd found on the shelf, one of the books the previous teacher had apparently left behind, making notes on what the children likely knew and what gaps needed filling. The lamp was low. The house was quiet. She heard him on the stairs before she saw him. Slow steps, like someone who had decided to come down and was reconsidering with every step. She didn't look up. He came into the kitchen, went to the water pitcher, poured himself a glass, and drank it standing up the way he had obviously been taught not to. She kept her eyes on the primer. He set the glass down. Then, "What are you doing?" "Making notes," she said. "On what?" "On what you and Emily know. So I know where to start." A pause. "You're really going to teach us?" "If your father agrees." "He'll agree," Noah said. The certainty in his voice was telling. It was the certainty of a boy who understood his father's priorities without having been told them explicitly. "Good," she said. She turned a page. "What do you like best, reading or numbers?" He was quiet long enough that she thought he wasn't going to answer. Then numbers. "Why?" Another pause. "They're the same everywhere," he said. "You do them right, they come out right. Every time." She looked up at him then. He was standing with his glass in his hand and his jaw set, and he was 10 years old, and he had just told her something true about himself that he probably hadn't intended to. "Reading's not like that," he said. "People argue about what words mean." "They do," she agreed. "That's part of what makes it interesting." He looked at her like she had said something mildly suspicious. "That's not why most people read." "No," she said. "But it's why I do." He processed this. "My mother read every night," he said, and the words came out low and fast, like something that had been waiting and escaped before he could stop it. Sarah held very still. "She read to us," he said. "Before bed. Even when she was sick." He stopped. His jaw tightened. At the end, she was too tired, but she'd hold the book, and Emily would read out loud, and Mama would follow along with her finger. The kitchen was completely quiet. "That sounds like a good mother," Sarah said carefully. She was. His voice was flat. Not cold flat in the way that voices go when emotion has been managed down so many times that the flatness itself is the sign of something enormous underneath. He set the glass down on the table. Precisely. In the center. "I don't want another one," he said. And then before she could respond, I don't mean." He stopped, started again. "Emily wants one. She's young enough. She needs someone. I understand that." "But you don't," Sarah said. Not a challenge, just a statement. "I had one," he said. "I don't need a replacement." The word landed between them. Replacement. Sarah looked at the primer in her hands, at the notes she'd made in the margins, at the lamp that was burning low. "I'm not here to replace her," she said. "Then why are you here?" The question was blunt and honest and 10 years old and completely fair. "Because your father needed help," she said. "And because I needed a place. Those are the real reasons. They're not romantic and they're not a story." She paused. "But I think given time they can become something that matters, if we let them." Noah stared at her. "That's an honest answer," he said, like he hadn't expected one. "I find it's usually easier," she said. He picked up his glass, rinsed it at the basin, set it to dry. And then he did something that she would think about for a long time afterward. He stopped in the doorway. And without turning around in a voice so quiet she had to strain to hear it, he said, "She would have liked the cornbread." And then he was gone back up the stairs, and the kitchen was empty again, and the lamp was burning low, and Sarah sat at the table with her hands flat on the primer, and her eyes closed, and something behind them that she refused very firmly to let fall. She did not sleep well that night. Not because the bed was bad, it was fine, and the quilt was warm despite the dry heat that didn't fully release even after dark, but because her mind kept returning to the same few moments on a loop, turning them over, looking at them from different angles, the way you work at a knot you can't quite see in the dark. Noah's voice, she would have liked the cornbread. James standing between Mrs. Aldridge and the front door, she's capable. Emily. 3 days in advance, asking for clean water in the basin. These were small things. She knew they were small things. She was not a fool, and she was not a woman who had survived the last 2 years of her life by mistaking small things for large ones. She understood the difference between a household that was beginning to tolerate her and a household that had accepted her and she was not going to confuse the two. But she lay in the dark with the east-facing window, showing her a sky full of more stars than she'd ever seen in her life back east, and she thought maybe small things are where everything starts. Maybe that was what she had gotten wrong before. Looking for the large gesture, the definitive moment, the clear sign. When really, it had always been the small things. The glass rinsed and set to dry. The shelf bracket driven in straight. The voice that stopped in the doorway to say something that didn't have to be said. She fell asleep with the stars still showing in the window. The next morning, James was already at the fence when she came outside with his coffee. He looked up. The surprise on his face was brief but genuine. "I figured you'd already be out here," she said, handing him the cup. He took it, looked at it, looked at her. "Emily and Noah are starting breakfast," she said. "Emily's making the oats, and Noah is making sure she doesn't burn them." "He'll do that," James said. The corner of his mouth shifted almost imperceptibly. "Emily's enthusiastic." "She is," Sarah agreed. "It's one of her best qualities, and her most alarming ones simultaneously." This time the shift in his face went a little further. It didn't quite become a smile. She suspected full smiles were events James Walker rationed carefully, but it came close enough that she filed it away. "She told me last night that she wants to be a doctor," Sarah said. "She says that every few weeks," James said. "Last month it was a judge. The month before, buffalo rider." Sarah looked at him. "She'd seen a picture," he said by way of explanation. "Well," Sarah said, "she's ambitious. That's not the worst thing." He drank the coffee, looked out at the fence. "What was it that made you a teacher?" he asked. The question surprised her. He'd been asking nothing personal since she arrived, all practical, all about the house and the list and the children's boots. She considered how much to say. "I was good at it," she said finally. "And it was one of the few things a woman in my position could do and be taken seriously doing." She paused. "I liked the children. That helped." "Position," he said. "What position was that?" She looked at the fence, at the wire he'd been threading yesterday. "A woman on her own," she said. "Without family close by. Without," she chose the next word carefully, "options." He didn't press it. He drank his coffee and said, "Noah's good at numbers." "I know?" she said. "He told me." "He talked to you last night." It wasn't quite a question. "A little," she said. James was quiet for a moment. "He hasn't talked much to anyone since Margaret passed," he said. "Mrs. Aldridge, me sometimes, Emily when he can't help it." A pause. "That's all." "He's carrying a lot," Sarah said. "He is." Another pause, longer. I don't always know how to." He stopped, started over. "He's 10. He shouldn't have to carry it." "No," she said. "He shouldn't." James turned the coffee cup in his hands. "I don't know what to do about that," he said. And the bluntness of it, the plain unguarded admission from a man who clearly found unguarded admissions to be a significant effort, stopped her where she stood. She thought carefully. "Sometimes the best thing," she said, "is to let someone else carry a little of it for a while, so he can see what it feels like to put it down." James looked at her. She held his gaze. She had meant the someone else to be her. She thought he understood that. She thought from the way he was looking at her that understanding it was costing him something he hadn't entirely budgeted for. "Breakfast'll be ready soon," she said, and turned back toward the house. She had gone 3 steps when he said behind her, "Miss Bennet." She stopped. "Thank you," he said, "for the coffee." She didn't turn around. "You're welcome, Mr. Walker," she said, and she walked back to the house where 2 children were making breakfast, and the summer heat was already building, and the list on the kitchen table still had 9 items on it, and everything, all of it, was just barely, cautiously, improbably beginning. 3 days passed before the next thing broke. Not the fence, not the roof, not anything James Walker could fix with wire and wood, and the particular brand of silent determination that had gotten him through the last 2 years. What broke was the careful managed distance that Noah Walker had been maintaining since the moment Sarah Bennett stepped through the gate. It broke over a mathematics problem. Sarah had started lessons on the fourth morning. Nothing formal, nothing that required desks or a bell, or the kind of institutional wait that made children feel trapped. She simply sat at the kitchen table after breakfast with 2 books and said, "Come sit with me." And Emily came immediately, and Noah came eventually, the way he did everything on his own timeline, and without making it look like he was doing what anyone had asked. She started with what she knew. Numbers for Noah, reading for Emily. Then she crossed them, gave Noah a story problem that required reading carefully to solve, gave Emily a counting exercise hidden inside a rhyme. Noah solved his problem in 4 minutes and looked up. "That's wrong," he said. Sarah looked at his work. "Show me where." He pointed. She looked at it. He was right. She had written the problem with an error in the original numbers, not intentionally, but she'd been tired, and the 7 had looked like a 1 in the lamplight the night before when she'd written it out. "You're correct," she said. "I made an error." He stared at her. "What?" she said. "You're not going to say you did it on purpose," he said. "To test me." "Did I?" "No," he said. "You just made a mistake." "I make them sometimes," she said. "Is that a problem?" He was quiet for a moment. Then, "My last teacher said she never made mistakes." "Did you believe her?" The corner of his mouth moved, just slightly. "No," he said. "Good," Sarah said. "Because anyone who tells you they never make mistakes is either lying to you or hasn't tried hard enough things yet." She pulled the paper back and rewrote the problem with the correct numbers. "Try it again." He tried it again. "Got it in 2 minutes this time." "Better problem," he said. "Better numbers?" She agreed. Emily across the table had been watching this exchange with the focused attention of a child who understands that something important is happening between 2 people who are not talking about math. She looked down at her reading and said nothing, but she was smiling. It was on the 6th day that Mrs. Aldridge's niece Clara came for the first time. She arrived with her father, who handed her down from the wagon with the careful solemnity of a man depositing something precious, shook James Walker's hand on the porch, and drove away without coming inside, which Sarah learned later was simply his manner, not a judgment on the household. Clara was 7 like Emily, with red hair and a serious face that broke into enormous animation the moment she saw Emily waiting at the gate. The 2 of them disappeared around the side of the house within 30 seconds. Sarah looked at James. James looked at the space where they'd been. "She's been out here twice since April," he said. It was hard for her without the school." "I understand," Sarah said. "I should have done something about it sooner," he said. The words came out flat, but underneath them was the particular texture of a man convicting himself of something. "You were managing," Sarah said. "I wasn't doing it well." "You were doing it alone," she said. "That's different from not doing it well." He looked at her. That look again, the one she was beginning to recognize, the one that appeared when she said something that landed somewhere he hadn't expected. He looked away. "Lessons today," he said. "After lunch," she said. "Let them have the morning." He nodded, picked up his hat, and went back to the barn. Sarah went inside, and in the kitchen, she stood at the window and watched James Walker walk across his yard toward the barn, and she thought about a man who had written a 12-item list 2 weeks before she arrived, who fixed things with his hands when he didn't know what else to do, who had planted himself between his door and a formidable neighbor woman without being asked who said I wasn't doing it well about himself, with the same plain directness he used for everything. She thought this man is going to be harder to know than a locked room. She thought, but the door is not welded shut. She went back to making lunch. The lesson that afternoon had 4 children in it. Clara, it turned out, was behind where she should have been in reading, not through any fault of her own, but because the teacher who had left in April had been leaving gradually for months before that, and the last weeks of instruction had been, by Clara's account, mostly her crying at her desk. Noah reported this fact without particular emotion, as though it were simply part of the record. "That must have been hard to watch," Sarah said. "It was embarrassing," Noah said. "For her. We didn't know where to look." "What did you do?" He shrugged. "Kept doing our work," he said. "Seemed like the kindest thing." Sarah looked at this 10-year-old boy who had decided that the kindest thing to do when an adult was breaking down in front of him was to keep quietly doing his work so she wouldn't feel watched. She thought, who taught you to be that careful with other people's dignity? She thought she knew the answer. "All right," she said. "Let's see where everyone is." She spent an hour moving between the four of them. Emily and Clara side by side with their reading primers, Noah working through a set of long division problems she'd constructed while they were having lunch. And a boy she hadn't expected Clara had brought her younger brother Thomas, age 8, who had appeared from behind her skirts with a look of intense suspicion that had softened over the course of an hour into something approaching interest. Thomas, it turned out, was fascinated by maps. She didn't have a map. She drew one, just the territory around the ranch, the creek to the north, the supply road to the east, the Walker property boundaries as best she understood them from Emily's descriptions. Thomas stared at it for 10 minutes without speaking. Then he said, "This part's wrong. The creek bends before it gets to the Miller place. It doesn't go straight." "How do you know?" Sarah asked. "I walked it," he said. "Then show me," she said, and handed him the pencil. He took it with both hands and bent over the paper with the intensity of a surgeon. Noah watched him from across the table with an expression that was for the first time entirely unguarded, a kind of pure recognition, one serious child seeing another. Emily leaned over to Clara and whispered something. Clara giggled. And Sarah sat at the head of the table in a ranch house in Wyoming in the hard middle of summer and felt quietly, carefully, without making anything of it, that this was the work she was meant to be doing. Not just teaching. This. The specific work of finding the thing each child was built for and handing them the pencil. James came in for water midway through the lesson and stopped in the doorway. He stood there long enough that Noah looked up and saw him. "Papa," Noah said, "did you know the creek bends before the Miller place?" James looked at Thomas, who was still bent over the map. "Yes," he said. "There's a rock formation that turns it." Thomas looked up. "What kind of rock?" "Sandstone mostly, some granite further along." Thomas grabbed the pencil again and made a notation on the map. "I want to see it," he said. "It's about 3 miles, James said. "Long walk for a summer day." "I don't mind long walks," Thomas said. James looked at the boy for a moment with an expression that was not quite a smile, but was in the same family. He looked at Sarah. She didn't say anything. She raised an eyebrow slightly. "Saturday," James said. "If your father agrees, I'll take you out." Thomas sat up straight. "Yes, sir," he said. Emily turned to Clara with the triumphant look of someone who had just watched a plan come together that she had nothing to do with planning. James refilled his water, set the cup down, and left. In his absence, the room expanded slightly the way rooms do when a large presence withdraws. But the expansion was comfortable this time. Not relieved, just roomier. Noah was looking at the doorway his father had just walked through. Then he looked at Sarah. She looked back at him steadily. He looked down at his division problems, but the look had meant something. She could feel that it had. She just didn't know yet what. The twist came on the 8th night. Sarah had been at the ranch 8 days. She had been counting without intending to the way you count things when you're not sure how long anything will last. She was in the kitchen after the children were in bed, writing a letter. Not to the matchmaking agency. To a woman named Ruth Hollis, who had been her closest friend in Hartford before everything fell apart, and who had written her 3 times since Sarah left and received no answer. Sarah had been avoiding writing back because writing back meant explaining, and explaining meant saying out loud the things she had been trying to keep in the middle of her chest where they couldn't do as much damage. But tonight, she picked up the pen and started. She had written 2 paragraphs when she heard James on the porch, not moving, just standing. The particular stillness of a man outside his own house at night, not ready to come in yet. She kept writing. After a while, she heard him come inside. She heard him pour a glass of water. Heard him move toward the kitchen doorway and stop. "Still up," he said. "Still up," she agreed. He came in and sat at the table, the side not the head, which was still the place he chose when he wasn't presiding over a meal. She had come to think of it as his thinking chair. "Letter," he said. "To a friend," she said. He looked at the pages, didn't try to read them. "You haven't written before," he said. "In 8 days." She looked up. "You notice that?" "I notice most things," he said, not with pride, just as a fact. She set the pen down. "It's hard to write when you don't know yet what to say about where you are," she said. "And now you know?" She thought about it honestly. "I know enough to start," she said. He turned the water glass in his hands. He did this when he was working toward something she'd noticed that too. The small circular motion, patient and deliberate. "There's something I should tell you," he said. She went still. "The agency sent a second letter," he said. "Arrived 3 days ago. I've been figuring out how to tell you." "What did it say?" she said. Her voice was level. She had learned in the last 2 years to keep her voice level when she was bracing for something. "There was another woman," he said, "before you. I'd corresponded with her for 6 weeks. We had an agreement." He stopped, turned the glass again. "She married someone else. Didn't write to cancel the arrangement. Just stopped writing." Sarah looked at him. "The agency felt responsible," he said. "So they found another match quickly. Sent you before I'd fully—" He paused. "Before I'd decided I was ready to try again." The kitchen was very quiet. "So I wasn't your first choice," she said. "You weren't my choice at all," he said. And the bluntness of it was not unkind, just honest in the way he was always honest. "You were a solution to a situation I hadn't planned for. I want you to know that, because I think you deserve to know what you walked into." Sarah looked at the letter in front of her, at the 2 paragraphs she had written to Ruth. "Why are you telling me now?" she said. "After 8 days. Because it took me 8 days to be sure I wanted to." She looked up at him. "Sure you wanted to tell me," she said, "or sure you wanted me to stay once you did?" The question landed between them like something dropped from a height. James Walker looked at her across the kitchen table in the low lamplight, and for the first time since she had arrived, he did not immediately have an answer. His jaw moved slightly. The glass turned once more in his hands. "Both," he said finally. Sarah held very still. This was the moment she knew. It was the moment where the next thing she said would determine the shape of something that hadn't finished forming yet. She could feel the weight of it. She had lived through enough of these moments to recognize them even if she hadn't always known what to do with them. She picked up her pen. "I wasn't my own first choice for this either," she said. "I had a job. I had a life that I thought was going in a direction." She kept her eyes on the letter. "Then I didn't. Then I was at a matching agency in a city I had no more reason to be in, talking to a woman who smelled like lavender and asked me questions about cooking and children." She paused. "I told her I could cook. That was half true. I told her I was good with children. That was completely true. I told her I was ready for a fresh start." She looked up. "That last part," she said, "I wasn't sure about at all." James looked at her. "Are you sure now?" he said. She didn't answer immediately. She thought about Emily's braids and Noah's hand on his mother's preserves, and Thomas bent over a hand-drawn map with a borrowed pencil. She thought about clean water in a basin arranged 3 days in advance. She thought about a man who stood between his door and the world, and said, "She's capable with something underneath it he hadn't named yet." "I'm getting there," she said. He nodded. Once. And the nod was not disappointment. She watched for it, and it wasn't there. It was something else. The nod of a man who has been answered honestly and finds to his own slight surprise that honesty is what he wanted. He stood, rinsed his glass, set it to dry. At the door, he stopped. "Sarah," he said. It was the first time he had used her given name, not Miss Bennet, not the careful formal distance of the last 8 days. Sarah. She looked at him. "The room with the east window," he said. "I had Margaret's things in there after she passed. Couldn't—" He stopped. "I moved them last month, when the agency wrote that someone was coming." He paused. "I want you to know that I moved them, before you arrived." She understood what he was telling her. Not that the room was empty, that he had made it ready, deliberately, before he was sure he was ready himself. "I know," she said. "The quilt is beautiful." Something moved across his face, fast and unguarded, and gone before she could fully name it. "Margaret made it," he said. "From the children's old clothes, things they'd outgrown." Silence. "Then it belongs in that room," Sarah said. "Something made with that much care belongs somewhere it'll be used." He stood in the doorway for a moment. Then he said, "Good night, Sarah." "Good night, James," she said. And she heard him go up the stairs slow and deliberate, the way he did everything. And she turned back to her letter to Ruth and sat there for a long moment, not writing, just sitting with the lamp burning low and the Wyoming night pressing warm and enormous against the windows. Then she wrote, "I think I might be all right. I'm not certain yet, but I think I might be." The crisis came without warning on the 11th day. Not from inside the house, from outside it. A man rode up the road in the early afternoon, while James was in the far field and Sarah was in the yard hanging the wash. He was well-dressed for the territory, too well-dressed. The kind of well-dressed that meant he hadn't gotten it dirty yet and intended to keep it that way. He had papers in his breast pocket, and the bearing of a man who considered himself to be arriving with authority. He stopped his horse at the gate. "I'm looking for a James Walker," he said. "This is property." "It is," Sarah said. "He's in the fields. Can I help you?" The man looked at her with the brief cataloging look of someone deciding how much information to give a woman. "I'll wait," he said. "You're welcome to," she said. "It may be a while." He dismounted. She went back to the wash. Emily appeared at this back door. Within 30 seconds, the child had a sixth sense for anything that disrupted the ordinary rhythm of the yard. Sarah caught her eye and shook her head slightly. Emily stayed on the porch watching. Noah appeared beside his sister a moment later. He looked at the man by the gate. Then he looked at Sarah. Sarah kept hanging the wash. The man waited 20 minutes. James came in from the field when he saw the horse at the gate. She watched him alter his path across the yard, the shift in his stride that meant he had registered something out of place. "Mr. Walker," the man said, extending his hand. "My name is Doyle. I represent the Harlan Land Trust out of Cheyenne." James shook his hand without expression. "What does the Harlan Trust want with me?" he said. "We have an interest in this parcel," Doyle said. He pulled the papers from his pocket. "There's an outstanding debt on the property taken on by your father in 1871. The note came due last spring. We've been patient, Mr. Walker, but the trust has authorized me to initiate foreclosure proceedings if the debt isn't settled within 30 days. The yard went absolutely silent. Sarah stopped moving. Her hands were on a shirt of Noah's that she'd been about to hang, and she held it without pinning it, without doing anything. And she looked at James Walker's face. He had gone very still. Not the stillness of surprise. The stillness of a man who has just heard something he was afraid of hearing, and is now measuring how afraid to let himself be. "How much?" he said. Doyle told him. Sarah didn't know enough about land prices and debt notes and Wyoming territory law to know if the number was fair or extortionate. But she knew from the way James Walker's jaw set, that particular angle, the one she'd been learning, that it was more than he had. "I'll need to review those papers," James said. "Of course," Doyle said, holding them out. James took them, looked at them. His face did not change. "I'll be in touch," he said. Doyle mounted his horse, touched his hat in Sarah's direction without quite looking at her, rode back down the road. James stood with the papers in his hands. Sarah walked toward him. "How bad?" she said quietly. He looked at her. Something in his eyes that she hadn't seen before. Not defeat, but the precursor to it, the moment before a man decides which way he's going to fall. "Bad enough," he said. "What does 30 days mean?" "It means I have 30 days to find money I don't have," he said. The flatness in his voice was different now. Thinner. Like something being stretched over something it didn't quite cover. "Can you talk to anyone?" she said. "A bank. Mrs. Aldridge. Someone." "Mrs. Aldridge has helped this family enough," he said, and the words came out sharp in a way that told her this was not a new thought. This was a line he had already drawn privately a long time ago. "Pride is a luxury when children are involved," she said. He looked at her hard. She held his gaze. "I know that," he said low. "Don't you think I know that?" "I think you know it and you're still going to let it be a factor," she said. "And I think that's going to cost you more than the debt." The papers crinkled slightly in his grip. Emily was still on the porch. She was too far to hear the words, but she was watching her father's face with the focused attention of a child who has learned to read weather from a person's expression. James saw her watching. Something shifted. He looked back at the papers. Then at Sarah. "My father borrowed against the land when I was 12, he said. "I didn't know the full amount until Margaret was already sick. Couldn't deal with it then. He stopped. Kept telling myself there was time. And now there isn't," she said. "And now there isn't." Sarah thought about the 12-item list, about a man who planned things carefully when he was in control and fixed fences when he wasn't. About 2 years of grief and a ranch he was holding together with wire and sheer stubbornness and the labor of a 10-year-old boy who shouldn't have had to carry any of it. "Let me write to someone," she said. He frowned. "Who?" "My friend Ruth," she said. "In Hartford. Her husband is a solicitor. He knows land law. I want to know what the trust can and can't actually do in 30 days, because men like Doyle use urgency the way other men use fists, and I want to know if the urgency is real before we start acting like it is." James stared at her. "You do that," he said. "I'm already doing it," she said. "I just need your permission to write on your behalf." He was quiet for a long moment. The papers turned once in his hands. "All right," he said. Sarah turned toward the house. "Sarah." His voice stopped her. She turned back. He was looking at her with an expression she didn't have a full name for. It had gratitude in it, but that wasn't all of it. It had something else, something more careful, more reluctant, more real. "Why?" he said. "You don't owe this. This isn't what you came here for." She looked at him for a moment. "I came here because I needed a place," she said. "And now I have one. That comes with things." She went inside. Behind her she heard him say something, too quiet to make out. She wasn't sure it was meant for her. She went to the table and picked up her pen and turned to a fresh page and started a new letter to Ruth. Not the one she'd been writing the night before, a different one. Shorter, more direct. The kind of letter you write when there's no time for the longer version. Emily appeared at her elbow. "Is Papa going to lose the ranch?" she said. Sarah didn't stop writing. "No," she said. "You sound sure." "I intend to be right," Sarah said. "Those are different things, but I'm starting with the first one." Emily leaned against her side, just slightly, just the warmth of a small body, pressing gently against her arm, and watched her write. Noah appeared in the doorway. He looked at his sister against Sarah's side. He looked at the letter being written. He looked at Sarah's face, which was focused and calm, in the way that faces are calm when the person wearing them has decided to be useful, and let that be enough for now. He walked to the table and sat down across from her. He opened his mathematics book. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. He just sat there in the same room doing his work, the same thing he had done for a crying teacher he barely knew because it had seemed like the kindest thing. Sarah wrote the letter. Outside through the window, she could hear James Walker's boots on the porch, that slow, deliberate pace, not moving anywhere, just standing, holding his ground, the way he always did. Ruth Hollis wrote back in 9 days. Sarah had not told James she was counting. She had simply been aware of the days the way you are aware of something you are waiting for, without admitting you are waiting, by the way each morning arrived with a particular quality of anticipation that she kept carefully off her face. James did not ask about the letter. He went about his work with the same deliberate steadiness he brought to everything, fixing the things that could be fixed, managing the things that couldn't, feeding the animals and checking the fences, and coming in for meals with his hat in his hand, and his jaw set at the angle she had come to read, like a weather report. He was holding. She could see that he was holding. She could also see what it was costing him. Noah could see it too. She knew because she caught him watching his father across the supper table on the 3rd night, 4th night, 5th night. That same careful, sidelong observation. He turned on everything he was trying to understand. The boy was his father's son, in ways that were sometimes painful to witness. The same stillness, the same economy, the same habit of making himself useful as a substitute for saying what he actually felt. On the 6th night, Noah helped James repair a water trough after supper without being asked. Sarah watched them through the window, the man and the boy working side by side in the last light, not talking, just moving around each other with the comfortable efficiency of people who know each other's patterns. She thought they have been doing this for 2 years, just the two of them and Emily, holding this place together by sheer collective will. She thought they have been alone too long. She dried the dishes and did not say it out loud. On the 9th morning, the letter arrived. James brought it in from the road when he collected the post, looked at the return address, and set it on the table in front of Sarah without a word. His face was deliberately neutral, in the way that faces are neutral when a person has practiced being unreadable and is not entirely succeeding. Sarah opened it. Ruth had written 4 pages in her small, precise hand. Ruth, who had married a solicitor and absorbed enough of his professional language to be dangerous with it when she chose to be. Sarah read it once quickly, then again slowly. Then she set it down and looked at the window for a moment. "Well," James said. She looked at him. "Sit down," she said. He sat. She had noticed he always sat when she asked him to, and never when anyone else did. She had seen Mrs. Aldridge tell him to sit on 2 separate occasions, and he had remained standing both times. She did not make anything of this aloud. She filed it away in the growing catalog of things she understood about James Walker that he had not told her directly. "The debt is real," she said. "Ruth's husband confirmed the original note from 1871 was legitimate. Your father signed it, and it passed to you with the property." James nodded once. He'd known this. "But," she said. He went still. "The Harlan Land Trust foreclosed on 2 other properties in the territory in the last 18 months using the same method," she said. "They acquire old notes, sometimes decades old, and they approach at moments of vulnerability, after a death, after a bad harvest. They make the debt seem more urgent and more absolute than it is legally required to be." She turned to the 2nd page of Ruth's letter. In both previous cases, the original note holders were given less than the legal minimum notice period under territorial law. Ruth's husband believes the same may apply here. James was looking at the letter in her hands. "What does that mean?" he said. "It means Doyle may not have the authority to initiate foreclosure in 30 days, she said. "The territorial statute requires 60 days notice minimum after the first written contact. You received verbal notice only. If that holds..." She looked at him. "You have twice the time you think you have." The kitchen was very quiet. "And the money," he said. "Twice the time doesn't change the amount." "No," she said. "But it changes what you can do with the time." She set the letter down and folded her hands on top of it in the deliberate way she had learned from Ruth herself years ago, when Ruth had told her if you want a man to take you seriously, make your hands still. Men read hands. Ruth's husband is willing to write to the trust on your behalf, officially as legal counsel. He believes there's a strong argument that the note was improperly transferred when your father's estate was settled, and that the trust's claim on the full amount may be disputable. James stared at her. Disputable, he repeated. Possibly reducible, she said. He cannot promise, but he is willing to try, and he will not charge you for the first correspondence. He says to consider it a professional courtesy. She paused. He is a good man. Ruth chose well. James looked at the letter, at the table, at his hands. Why would he do that for a stranger? He said. Because I asked Ruth, she said. And Ruth has never in her life been able to say no to a problem she could actually help with. She looked at him steadily. And because I told her about the children. Something crossed James's face, quick and complicated, there and gone. You told her about Emily and Noah, he said. Yes. What did you tell her? Sarah thought about the letter she had written at this table 10 days ago, with Emily pressed warm against her arm and Noah sitting across from her, doing his mathematics in silent solidarity. She thought about what she had written, not all of it, just what was true and necessary. That they deserved to keep their home, she said, and that their father was a man who would work himself to the bone before he asked for help. James was quiet for a long time. Outside, she could hear Emily in the yard talking to Clara, who had come again that morning for lessons. She could hear the particular cadence of Emily's voice when she was being emphatic about something, rising at the end of each sentence, like a question that wasn't actually a question. All right, James said finally. All right to the letter, she said. All right to the letter, he said. And... He stopped. The glass turning motion, but his hands were flat on the table, and there was no glass, so the motion had nowhere to go, and he stilled them deliberately. Thank you, Sarah. I mean it. I know you do, she said. She picked up the letter and went to write her reply to Ruth. She did not let herself smile until she had her back to him. Nick. The response from the Harlan Land Trust came faster than anyone expected. 12 days after Ruth's husband sent his letter, formal, precisely worded, citing 3 specific provisions of territorial property law that the trust had apparently hoped no one in Wyoming would bother to look up, a different man arrived at the Walker Ranch. Not Doyle. A quieter man, older, with the tired eyes of someone who spends his life cleaning up after other people's overreach. He introduced himself to James on the porch as Mr. Pierce, representing the trust's legal interests. James did not invite him in. Sarah watched from the kitchen window. She could not hear the conversation. She could read it the way James stood the papers that changed hands, the brief exchange that lasted maybe 10 minutes before Pierce mounted his horse and left. She watched James stand on the porch with the papers in his hand and look at the road for a moment after the horse was gone. Then he turned and came inside. He set the papers on the table. Sarah looked at him. They're reducing the claim, he said, by a third, and extending the repayment period to 18 months. She let out a breath. That's still a significant amount, he said. I won't pretend it isn't, but it's... He paused. It's manageable. If the harvest is decent and I take on the Aldridge contract for winter feed supply, it's manageable. Then it's manageable, she said. He looked at her. You did this, he said. Ruth's husband did this, she said. I wrote a letter. Sarah. James. He made a sound that was not quite a laugh, but was the closest thing to one she'd heard from him. It came from somewhere low, and a little surprised, like a thing that had forgotten how to happen, and then did it anyway. He picked up the papers and straightened them against the table. I need to tell the children, he said. Emily will want a full explanation, Sarah said. Noah will want to see the numbers. I know my children, he said, but there was no sharpness in it. It was warm in the way that his dry observations sometimes were, the warmth that came sideways instead of straight on. You do, she agreed. He headed for the door, then stopped. When I'm done with the children, he said without turning around, I'd like to. There's something I've been meaning to say, if you have time this evening. Sarah looked at his back. at the particular set of his shoulders which she had learned to read the way sailors read the sky. "I'll have time," she said. The storm that afternoon was the kind that came without apology. It had been building since midday, the air going thick and copper-colored, the animals restless, the wind turning and turning like something trying to find a direction it was satisfied with. Sarah had grown up with eastern storms, which announced themselves politely and arrived on schedule. Wyoming storms, she was learning, did no such thing. She was in the yard bringing in the wash when the sky opened. Not gradually. All at once. She got the wash. She did not get herself. She was soaked to the skin by the time she reached the back door, and she came inside in a waterfall of herself, dropping the laundry basket and standing on the kitchen floor, making a significant puddle. Emily looked at her from the table. "You're very wet," Emily said. "I am aware," Sarah said. "Papa said the storm was coming at 2. "Papa was right," Sarah said. "He usually is about weather," Emily said with the matter-of-fact quality she brought to everything. "Mama used to say he could smell rain coming 2 days out." Sarah wrung out her sleeve over the basin. "That's a useful quality in a rancher." "She said it was an annoying quality in a husband," Emily said, "because he would tell her 2 days in advance that she couldn't hang the wash, and she'd hang it anyway and then have to bring it in." Sarah looked at the child. Emily looked back at her with those enormous eyes, perfectly serene. "Did she hang it anyway today?" Sarah asked. "You tell me," Emily said. Sarah looked down at the dripping laundry basket. "She did," she confirmed. Emily's face cracked into a smile, a real one, the kind that took over her whole face the way sun takes over a room. And Sarah stood there dripping on the kitchen floor and laughed. Actually laughed from somewhere genuine, the way she hadn't in long enough that the feeling was slightly unfamiliar and entirely welcome. Noah appeared in the doorway at the sound of it. He looked at Sarah, at the puddle, at the laundry basket, at Emily's expression. The corner of his mouth moved. "I'll get the mop," he said. James came in from the barn at the height of the storm and found Sarah in dry clothes at the stove and the kitchen floor spotless, and both children at the table. Emily drawing something on the back of an old envelope, Noah reading. He stood in the doorway and looked at the scene with the expression of a man who has walked into a room that is somehow more than he expected and is not yet sure what to do with the excess. "Wash," he said. "Brought in," Sarah said. "Mostly intact." "Mostly. There was an incident involving your blue shirt and the wind," she said. "It's been recovered. Minor losses only." He came to the stove, poured coffee, stood beside her for a moment, in the way he had been increasingly standing beside her. Not touching, not hovering, just present in the warm proximity that had been growing so gradually, she had almost not noticed when it crossed the line from accident into intention. "The children know about the debt," he said low enough that only she could hear it under the sound of the rain. "I explained it to them this afternoon. Noah wanted to see the numbers. Emily asked if we had to leave." "What did you tell them?" "That we didn't," he said. "That someone had helped us." Sarah kept her eyes on the stove. "What did Emily say?" He was quiet for a moment. "She said she knew you would," he said. Sarah's hand on the spoon went still for just a second. Then she kept stirring. "And Noah," she said. Another pause. Longer. "He said," James said carefully, "that you were good at solving problems." And then he went back to his book. "High praise," Sarah said. "From Noah," James said, "it's extraordinary." They stood together at the stove with the rain coming down hard against the windows, and the children at the table, and the coffee going warm between them. And Sarah thought, this is the thing I didn't know I was coming west for. Not the arrangement, not the household, not the list of 12 practical items in careful handwriting. This, the specific weight of standing beside someone in a storm with nowhere particular to be and nothing particular to prove. She did not say any of this. She said, "Supper in 20 minutes. "I'll wash up," he said. But he didn't move immediately. He stood for another moment. Then he said, "Tonight, I meant what I said. I have something to tell you." I remember, she said. He nodded and went to wash up. Emily across the room had put down her drawing and was looking at Sarah with an expression of elaborate innocence. What? Sarah said. Nothing, Emily said. Emily. I'm just drawing, Emily said. Sarah looked at the envelope she'd been drawing on. Emily immediately turned it face down. Emily Walker, Sarah said. It's private, Emily said with great dignity. Noah did not look up from his book, but the page hadn't turned in 4 minutes. The big twist arrived after supper, and it did not come from James. It came in the form of a letter Sarah found tucked inside the back cover of the primer she'd been using for lessons. A letter that had clearly been there for some time, and that she had not found because she'd been working from the front of the book and hadn't reached the back until that evening when she was reorganizing her teaching materials. The letter was not addressed to her. It was addressed to whoever reads to my children after I am gone. Sarah's hands went completely still. The handwriting was different from James's softer, more slanted the writing of someone who had learned it with care and pleasure rather than necessity. She recognized it instinctively as a woman's hand, and she recognized it specifically as the hand of someone who had known she was running out of time and had done what she could with what remained. She should have put it down. She should have taken it to James. She read it, not all of it. 3 paragraphs before she made herself stop, because 3 paragraphs was already more than she'd had the right to read, and because what was in those 3 paragraphs was sitting in her chest like a stone, and she needed a moment to breathe around it before she could make a sensible decision. Margaret Walker had written, I don't know who you are. I don't know if you're kind. I hope you are. James is not a man who shows what he needs, but he needs a great deal, and he will not ask for any of it. Please don't wait for him to ask. He'll wait forever and call it patience, and it's actually fear, and he deserves better than his own fear. She had written, Noah will test you. He's testing everyone right now. He's afraid that loving someone new means losing me again. It doesn't. Please tell him that if you find a way. And then the line that had made Sarah stop reading Emily already knows you'll be good. She decided before you arrived. She does that sees what people are before they've shown it. She gets that from her father, who did the same thing with me and spent 3 months convincing himself he was wrong. Sarah sat with the letter in her hands and the lamp burning low and the rain still coming down outside. She heard James's boots on the stairs. She folded the letter quickly, put it back inside the primer, and pressed the cover closed. Her hands were not entirely steady. He came into the kitchen. He had changed out of his work clothes into the clean shirt he wore on Sundays, and sometimes on evenings that mattered, and she registered this without letting it register on her face. He sat at the table, beside his thinking chair, and looked at her. Emily's asleep, he said. Noah's reading. Good, she said. He looked at the primer under her hands. She moved her hands off it. What did you want to tell me? She said. He was quiet for a moment. The glass turning motion, but there was no glass on the table, and his hands settled after a moment into stillness. When Margaret died, he said, I told myself I was done. Not from grief alone, though there was enough of that, but because I thought the problem with loving someone is the after, what it leaves, and I decided once was enough of that. She waited. Then the ranch got ahead of me, he said, and the children needed more than I knew how to give them alone, and I wrote to the agency because it was practical. That's what I told myself. He paused. That's not entirely what it was. What was it? She said. He looked at the table. I was lonely, he said. The word came out like it had been stored under pressure. I have been for 2 years, and I'm not good at it. Some men are. I'm not. Sarah looked at him. That's not weakness, she said. I know that intellectually, he said. I don't always know it otherwise. She understood that distinction completely. She had lived inside it for 2 years. When you arrived, he said, I don't know what I expected. Someone capable. Someone who would manage things. I told myself that was enough. And, she said. He raised his eyes to her. And you mended the curtains, he said. And you went into the root cellar without complaint. And you wrote a letter that cut a third off a debt I'd been losing sleep over for months. And you made Noah laugh. Not smile laugh last Tuesday when you told him his long division was technically correct, but morally questionable. Sarah blinked. I remember saying that. He talked about it for 2 days, James said. He told Emily. He told me. He said it twice at breakfast the next morning, like he was still working out if it was funny. A pause. Noah has not talked about anything twice since his mother died. Sarah felt something shift in her chest. That particular movement, the one she had been trying to manage for days now, the one that kept getting larger, no matter how carefully she kept her hands still and her voice level and her face arranged into something that looked like practical contentment. James, she said, I'm not asking you to feel anything you don't feel, he said quickly. I know this arrangement was practical on both sides. I know I wasn't warm when you arrived. I wasn't what anyone would call welcoming. You put clean water in the basin, she said. He stopped. Emily told me, she said, that she asked you to, 3 days before I arrived. He was quiet. A man who puts clean water in the basin 3 days in advance, she said, is not an unwelcoming man. He's a man who doesn't know how to say welcome and does it with his hands instead. James Walker looked at her across the table in the low lamplight of a Wyoming kitchen, with the rain coming down outside and his children asleep above them. And something in his face, something that had been managed and controlled and carefully maintained for 2 years, came loose. Not dramatically, not all at once. Just a slight, irrevocable loosening like a knot that had been too tight for too long and finally in the right hands began to give. I don't know how to do this, he said. I want to be honest with you about that. I don't either, she said. I think that might be all right. I think I want you to stay, he said. Not because of the list, not because of the children, because of... He stopped, started again. Because when I come in for coffee in the morning, you're already up, and there's already coffee, and the kitchen it's not empty. And I didn't know how much I'd been noticing the empty until it stopped. The rain came down. Sarah looked at this man who fixed things with his hands and wrote careful lists and stood between his door and the world, and had spent 2 years being lonely without calling it that. She thought about Margaret's letter in the primer, about he deserves better than his own fear. She thought about 11 days on coaches and wagons and 1 flatbed cart smelling of turpentine, about a matching agency and a woman who smelled like lavender, and a choice made from the bottom of a very narrow set of options. She thought, and look where that choice led. I want to stay, she said. I've wanted to stay since Noah told me his mother would have liked the cornbread. I didn't say it because I wasn't sure if wanting was enough. Is it? He said. She considered this honestly. It's a start, she said. The rest gets built. He nodded slowly. Built, he repeated like he was testing the word. The way you built this ranch, she said. The way you fixed the root cellar shelf. The way Noah drove those bracket nails straight, careful, one at a time. She looked at him. Nothing worthwhile was ever done all at once. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he reached across the table, not reaching for her hand, not quite, but moving his hand to the center of the table and letting it rest there open in the space between them. Sarah looked at his hand, at the calluses on the palm, at the careful, still way he held it. She moved her hand forward and covered his. Neither of them said anything. Outside, the rain came down on the Walker Ranch and the fields and the repaired fence and the fixed root cellar, washing the dust off everything and leaving the world clean and temporary and possible. Emily's drawing was still on the table face down. Sarah reached over with her other hand and turned it. It was a drawing of 4 people. A tall man with a hat. A woman with dark hair. A boy with a book. A small girl with braids. They were standing in front of a house. Underneath in Emily's careful 7-year-old writing, "Our family." James saw it. He was very still for a moment. Then he said low and rough, the voice of a man who has been holding something heavy for 2 years and is only now carefully beginning to put it down. She drew that a week ago. She showed me, and I didn't know what to say to her? What did you say? Sarah asked. I said it was a good drawing, he said. Sarah looked at the drawing, at the 4 careful figures, at our family written underneath in a child's deliberate hand. It is a good drawing, she said. And James Walker looked at the woman sitting across from him with her hand over his, and the rain coming down outside, and his children safe above them, and said nothing more. Because some things, by the time you arrive at them, don't need to be said. They just need to be kept. The drawing stayed on the kitchen table all night. Neither of them moved it. In the morning, Sarah came downstairs to find Emily already in the kitchen, and the first thing Emily did was look at the table to see if the drawing was still there. She found it in exactly the place she had left it face up now, which it hadn't been when she'd gone to bed, and she looked at it for a moment, and then she looked at Sarah, and she said nothing at all. But she smiled. The full-face smile, the one that took over everything. Then she started on the oats. Sarah poured coffee and did not make anything of it because Emily was 7 and already understood that some things were more powerful when they were not spoken directly, and the last thing Sarah wanted to do was take that understanding away from her by confirming it too loudly. Noah came down 10 minutes later, looked at the drawing on the table, looked at Sarah, and sat down. You should eat, he said. I'm getting there, she said. He pulled his bowl toward him. You look tired, he said. I didn't sleep much. Papa either, he said. I heard him moving around. She looked at him. He kept his eyes on his bowl. I'm not saying anything about it, he said. I'm just noting the fact. Duly noted, she said. The corner of his mouth moved, the small motion she had come to wait for without admitting she was waiting. James came in from outside. He had been to the barn already, the way he always was the day starting for him, before it started for anyone else, and he came to the stove and poured his coffee and stood for a moment at the window. Then he sat at the table. Not the head, the side, his thinking chair. He looked at the drawing. Emily was watching him from across the table with elaborate casualness. Morning, Papa, she said. Morning, he said. Did you sleep well? Well enough, he said. Emily accepted this with the diplomatic restraint of a child who has decided not to push a thing that is already moving in the right direction. Noah ate his oats. Sarah brought the bread to the table, and the Walker family, all 4 of them, in the particular configuration that had been assembling itself one careful morning at a time for 3 weeks, ate breakfast together in the way that people eat breakfast when they have stopped being strangers and have not yet found the words for what they are instead. The news from town arrived before noon, and it arrived badly. Thomas's father came himself, which was unusual enough that Sarah knew something was wrong before the man opened his mouth. He was a quiet man, ordinarily one of those men the West produced in quantity, worn smooth by work and weather, into something spare and essential. He came to the porch and took his hat off and said, James, I need to talk to you, and I think Miss Bennet ought to hear it too. They went inside. He sat at the kitchen table and turned his hat in his hands and said that Doyle had been in town the previous day. Not quietly. He'd been at the feed store and the post office and the saloon, and at each place he'd said versions of the same thing, that the Walker Ranch debt was public record, that the amount was substantial, that a man in Walker's position had no real prospect of repaying it, and that anyone doing business with Walker, or extending him credit, was taking a risk they ought to think hard about. James listened to all of this without moving. He's poisoning the credit, Sarah said. Thomas's father looked at her. Yes, ma'am, he said. That's exactly what he's doing. Aldridge contract for the winter feed. Harlan Trust has already approached Aldridge separately. Offered to supply at lower rate if he breaks with Walker. The kitchen went very still. James set his coffee cup down. Precisely. In the center of the table. Has Aldridge said anything? He said. Not yet, Thomas's father said. But he's being pressured. And there are 2 other ranchers who were considering Walker for summer work who've already backed away. Sarah looked at James. His face was doing the managed flatness thing, the thing she now knew was not blankness, but the deliberate containing of something very large. "They can't do this legally," she said. "What Doyle is doing, spreading information about a private debt negotiation. It's public record," Thomas's father said, not unkindly. "Once a foreclosure notice is filed, it's public. He's not breaking the law. He's just using the law like a weapon," Sarah said. "Yes, ma'am." James stood up. "I need to speak to Aldridge directly," he said. "That'd be my recommendation," Thomas's father said. He stood, put his hat back on. "I'm sorry, James. I wanted you to hear it from someone who's on your side." "I appreciate it," James said. The man left. The kitchen was quiet. Noah was in the doorway. He had come downstairs without anyone hearing him. He moved silently when he wanted to, which was most of the time, and he had heard enough. Sarah could see it in his face, which had gone tight in the way it went tight when he was managing something he didn't have words for yet. "Are we losing the ranch?" he said. "No," James said. "You don't know that," Noah said. It was the first time Sarah had heard him challenge his father directly. Not rudely, flatly. The same flat, honest register James himself used, the register the boy had learned from watching the man. James looked at his son. "You're right," he said. "I don't know it for certain, but I know I'm not going to let it happen without fighting for it." "How?" Noah said. James picked up his hat. "By going to talk to Aldridge before Doyle gets another day's head start," he said. He looked at Sarah. "Will you?" "Go," she said. "I'll be here." He went. Noah stood in the doorway, watching the space where his father had been. "He'll fix it," Emily said from behind her brother. She had appeared silently, the way she sometimes did, and was looking at Noah with the particular certainty she brought to things she had decided were true. "He always fixes things. He can't fix everything," Noah said. "He doesn't have to fix everything," Emily said. "He just has to fix this one." Noah looked at his sister for a moment. Then he turned and went back upstairs. Sarah looked at Emily. Emily looked back at her. "He's scared," she said simply. "He doesn't like being scared. It makes him mean." "Not mean," Sarah said. "Just sharp." Emily considered this. "Sharp," she agreed. "That's a better word." James was gone 4 hours. It was the longest 4 hours Sarah had managed in some time, and she managed them by doing what she always did. When the waiting was bad, she worked. She finished the last 2 items on the original list. She set up the week's lessons. She made bread because bread required attention, and attention was what she needed to spend on something that wasn't the road James had ridden down. Noah came down at the 2-hour mark and sat at the table without a book. That was how she knew he was really frightened. She didn't say anything about it. She cut him a piece of bread from the loaf that had just come out, put butter on it, set it in front of him. He ate it. "Tell me something," he said. "What kind of something?" "Anything," he said. "Something that isn't about the ranch." She thought for a moment. "When I was about your age," she said, "my father lost his position at the mill where he worked. We had 6 weeks where we didn't know what was going to happen. My mother made bread every day that month, more bread than we could eat. We gave most of it to the neighbors." Noah looked at the bread in his hand. "Why?" "I asked her the same thing," Sarah said. "She said it was because she couldn't fix the problem, but she could do something. And doing something, even something small, was better than sitting still with the fear." Noah ate the bread. "Is that why you made bread today?" he said. Sarah looked at the loaf. "Yes," she said. He nodded slowly. He turned the bread in his hands. "My mother used to do that too," he said. "Not bread. She'd sew. She'd sew things that didn't need sewing. Papa used to say she was the only woman he knew who could darn a sock that had no holes in it." Sarah made a sound that was almost a laugh. "He said it kindly," Noah said quickly. He always said it kindly, like it was something he loved about her." "I know," Sarah said. Noah looked at the table. I keep thinking about the preserves, he said. The ones in the root cellar, the last ones she made. I know, Sarah said again. They're safe. I moved them to the top shelf. He looked up at her. I moved them the first week, she said. Somewhere they wouldn't get knocked. I thought if those are the last ones, they should last as long as possible. Noah stared at her. Something moved across his face. The large, unmanageable thing that had been living underneath his flatness for 3 weeks, the thing she had been watching without reaching for, waiting for him to bring it to the surface on his own time. She would have liked you, he said. His voice was very quiet. Different from the night he had said she would have liked the cornbread fuller, more decided the statement of a conclusion rather than a cautious offering. I hope so, Sarah said carefully. She liked people who did things, he said, who didn't just talk about doing them. She had no patience for people who just talked. He paused. She would have liked that you went into the root cellar on the first day. She would have liked the letter you wrote. She would have liked... He stopped. His jaw worked the way his father's did. She would have been glad that you're here. Sarah was quiet for a moment. Noah, she said carefully, I need you to hear something. He looked at her. I am not here to take her place, she said. I will never be what she was to you. I'm not trying to be. She was your mother. That is permanent, and it is yours, and no one can touch it. She held his gaze. But I am here, and I intend to stay. And I would very much like if you're willing to be something. Not a replacement, something new, something we figure out together as we go. Noah looked at her for a long time. Then he said, Okay. One word. Flat, simple, irrevocable. Okay, she said. He picked up his bread and ate the rest of it, stood, went to the window and looked out at the road. 3 minutes later, he said, He's coming. James came through the door with the look of a man who has had a hard conversation and come out the other side of it still standing. He put his hat on the hook. He went to the water pitcher. He drank a full glass standing up. Noah watched him. Emily came downstairs as if she'd heard him arrive through the walls. James set the glass down and turned around. Aldridge is keeping the contract, he said. Emily made a sound like air escaping from something that had been held too tight. He told Doyle's representative that he does business based on a man's word and his work, and he's known James Walker for 6 years, and that's not changing because some land trust from Cheyenne sent a well-dressed man to stand in his yard. He paused. Those were Aldridge's words, apparently, nearly exactly. Mrs. Aldridge, Emily said with utter certainty. James looked at her. She told him to say that, Emily said. She always tells him what to say when it matters. Something crossed James's face, the not-quite smile, more of it this time. That is my strong suspicion as well, he said. He looked at Sarah. There's more, he said. She waited. 3 other ranchers in town, Prentice Hogue and Calloway, heard about what Doyle was doing at the feed store. They didn't like it. He paused. Prentice came to find me at Aldridge's. Said if I needed labor in lieu of immediate wages during the repayment period, he had 2 hands he could spare 2 days a week. Hogue sent word that his wife has been wanting to talk to you specifically about starting a proper school. She has 4 children, and Clara and Thomas make 6, and there are 3 more families within 8 miles who'd contribute to a teacher's fee. Sarah stared at him. A school, she said. A real one, he said. With a room and a fee and regular hours. He looked at her steadily. That would be income, separate from the ranch. Yours. She understood what he was offering. Not just a school. The thing underneath the school, the independence, the agency, the answer to the question she hadn't asked aloud, which was, what am I here apart from what I do for you? He had been thinking about it. He had gone to Aldridge to save the ranch, and he had come back with something for her. James, she said. You don't have to decide now, he said. I want to, she said. I want the school. He nodded once. Noah said quietly from the window, I knew you would.
tune.
The twist came 3 days later, and it came in the form of a letter Sarah had not expected, and had been in some deep and carefully suppressed part of herself afraid of. It was from Hartford, not from Ruth. From a man named Gerald Farrow, who had been Sarah's employer at the Hartford Academy for Girls for 7 years, who had dismissed her 14 months ago under circumstances that she had told no one in Wyoming about, and whose name on an envelope made her stomach drop in a way she had not felt since the day she arrived on the Walker Ranch with ruined shoes and nothing left. She opened it in the privacy of her room with the east-facing window. Farrow wrote that he had heard through channels he did not specify, but that she suspected involved Ruth's husband, that she was employed as a teacher in Wyoming Territory. He wrote that he was prepared to provide a letter of professional reference, a full, unqualified reference, if she required one for her new position. He wrote, "I am aware that my actions 14 months ago were unjust. I am aware that the circumstances under which your position was terminated did not reflect your professional conduct, but rather my own failure to manage a difficult situation with the integrity it deserved. I cannot restore what was taken. I can offer this." Sarah sat on the edge of the bed with the letter in her hands. 14 months ago, Gerald Farrow had dismissed her because a parent wealthy influential, the kind of influential that got people dismissed, had complained that Miss Bennett was teaching the older girls about property law and women's rights to independent income, and that this was outside the curriculum and furthermore unsettling to the girls. Farrow had called her into his office and told her in the language of a man who was embarrassed by what he was doing, and doing it anyway, that her contract would not be renewed. She had packed her desk in 1 hour. She had been in Hartford for 3 more months, running out of money and options before Ruth had shown her the agency advertisement and said, "Go west, Sarah. Start over. You're too good for a city that doesn't know what to do with you." She had not told James any of this. She sat with the letter for a long time. Then she went downstairs. James was at the table. The children were outside. She could hear Emily's voice in the yard, the particular cadence of Emily mid-story, which meant Clara was probably there. She sat across from James and put the letter on the table between them. He looked at it. At her. "Read it," she said. "Please." He read it. She watched his face while he did the slight tightening at the second paragraph, the stillness at the third. He set it down. "You were dismissed," he said. "Yes, for teaching girls about property law." "And independent income," she said. "Yes." He looked at the letter, then at her. "How old were the girls?" 16, 17. He was quiet for a moment. "And you thought this was appropriate material?" "I thought it was essential material," she said, "for girls who would enter a world that had very specific ideas about what they could own and what they couldn't. I thought they deserved to know the truth of it before they walked into it." She held his gaze. "I still think that." He looked at her for a long time. "Why didn't you tell me?" he said. "Because I needed the position," she said plainly. "And I didn't know yet if you were a man who would hold it against me." And now I know you're not," she said. "And I should have told you sooner, and I'm sorry for the omission." James turned the letter once on the table, then he picked it up, folded it precisely, and held it back out to her. "Write him back," he said. "Tell him you'll take the reference. You'll need it for the school." She took the letter. "That's all," she said. "What else should there be?" he said. "You taught girls the truth about their own lives. A man fired you for it. Now he's sorry." He picked up his coffee. "The world's full of men who do the wrong thing and apologize later. That doesn't concern me. What you did, what you taught those girls, that's the part that matters to me." Sarah looked at him. "James Walker," she said. "Sarah Bennett," he said. "You are considerably more than I expected," she said. The not quite smile came all the way this time. Not enormous, it was still a careful private thing, the smile of a man who had learned to keep such things close. But it was full, real, the smile of someone who has arrived somewhere and knows it. "So are you," he said. 2 weeks later, on a Saturday morning that had come in clear and bright after a week of heat, James Walker asked Sarah Bennett to marry him. He did not do it dramatically. He was not a dramatic man. He did not get down on one knee or produce a ring or arrange an audience. He did it in the kitchen in the ordinary morning while she was pouring coffee. He said, "I'd like to make this permanent, if you're willing." She put the coffee pot down. He said, "I know this isn't how it's usually done. I know I should probably have something more prepared. But I've been sitting with the prepared version for 10 days, and every version I've come up with sounds like something I read somewhere, and I don't want to say you something I read somewhere." She turned around. "I want to marry you," he said, "because you are the most capable, honest, and quietly formidable woman I have ever met. Because you walked into this broken place and went to work on it without complaint and without theater. Because you made my son laugh. Because you moved my daughter's mother's preserves to the top shelf so they'd last longer." He stopped. "Because the kitchen isn't empty anymore, and I don't want it to be empty again." Sarah looked at him for a long moment. "Yes," she said. He blinked. "Yes," she said again. "I'm willing. I want to. Yes." He stood very still for a moment, as if the answer had arrived faster than he was built to process it. Then he nodded. "All right," he said. "All right," she said. They looked at each other across the kitchen. Then Sarah picked up his coffee cup and held it out to him. He took it. And that was that. Emily found out first, because Emily always found out first. Sarah didn't know how she and James had agreed to tell the children that evening together, but at mid-morning, Emily appeared in the doorway of the room where Sarah was preparing lesson materials and stood there with her arms at her sides and her chin slightly raised. "Is it true?" she said. Sarah looked at her. "What did you hear?" "I heard Papa telling the horses," Emily said. A pause. "He tells the horses things," Emily said by way of explanation, "when he doesn't know who else to tell." Sarah sat back in her chair. "Yes," she said. "It's true." Emily crossed the room in 3 steps and put both arms around Sarah's neck and held on with the full-body conviction that 7-year-olds bring to the things that matter most. Sarah put her arms around her. They stayed like that for a moment. Then Emily said into her shoulder, "I knew you would stay. I knew it the first day." "I know you did," Sarah said. "Nobody believed me." "Noah believed you eventually," Emily pulled back. "He believed you," she said precisely. "That's different. I believed you would stay. He believed you were worth staying for. Those are not the same thing." Sarah looked at this 7-year-old child who had her father's eyes and her mother's clarity, and her own particular brand of wisdom that owed nothing to either of them. "No," she said. "They're not the same thing." Emily nodded satisfied and went back to the yard. Noah took longer. At supper that evening, James told both children plainly the same directness he brought to everything. No embellishment, no theater. Just, "I have asked Miss Bennett to marry me, and she has agreed. He said, I want to know how you feel about it." Emily said she felt good about it. Noah said nothing. James looked at him. Noah was looking at his plate. He was doing the managing thing, the internal management of the large thing underneath. She could see it happening, could see the way his jaw worked, and his hands went still on the table. "You don't need my permission," Noah said finally. "No," James said. "But I want to know how you feel." Silence. "I don't know yet," Noah said. "I need to think about it." "That's fair," James said. Noah looked up, not at James, at Sarah. She held his gaze steadily. "Are you going to leave?" he said. "If things get hard, if the debt doesn't get settled right, if the school doesn't work." He paused. "Are you going to leave like the other teacher left?" "No," she said. "You can't know that," he said. "You're right," she said. "I can't guarantee the future. Nobody can. But I can tell you what I know right now, which is that I am exactly where I chose to be, and I have never in my life walked away from something I chose. I've been pushed away. I've been forced away. But I have never walked." Noah looked at her. "Mrs. Calloway says you were fired from your last school," he said. Sarah blinked. Then she said, "News travels fast in a territory with no newspaper." "She said you taught girls things they weren't supposed to know," he said. "I taught them things they needed to know," she said. "That was considered the same thing by certain people." "Were you sorry?" he said. "That you did it?" "No," she said. "Not for a single day." Noah was quiet. Then very slowly, like a thing being decided in real time. "Okay," he said. James looked at his son. Noah picked up his fork. "The potatoes are getting cold," he said. Emily let out a sound that was a laugh disguised as a cough. James reached over and put his hand briefly on Noah's shoulder, one firm press. Nothing more, and Noah didn't shrug it off. It was the most James Walker had touched his son in front of another person in the 3 weeks Sarah had known them. She saw it. She said nothing about it. She ate her potatoes. The formal wedding was small. A circuit preacher, Mrs. Aldridge, and her husband Thomas's family, Ruth Hollis, who had taken the extraordinary step of traveling from Hartford because she had written back, "I am not missing this. Sarah, do not argue with me," and Sarah had not argued. Ruth stood beside Sarah before the ceremony, in the room with the east-facing window, and looked at her for a long time and said, "You look different." "I'm the same," Sarah said. "You're not," Ruth said. "You look like someone who has landed somewhere." She paused. "You looked like someone falling for a very long time. Now you look landed." Sarah thought about that. "He put clean water in the basin," she said. "Before I arrived, 3 days before." Ruth stared at her. "His daughter asked him to," Sarah said. "But he did it." Ruth looked at the ceiling for a moment, in the manner of a woman who is deciding whether to cry and has decided against it for practical reasons. "All right," she said. "All right, that is yes, fine. I approve." "I wasn't asking," Sarah said. "I know," Ruth said. "I'm telling you anyway." They looked at each other. These two women who had known each other through the best and worst of things, and Ruth reached out and straightened the collar of Sarah's dress with the precise, affectionate efficiency of someone who has been doing things for you for years and intends to go on doing them regardless of the distance between you. "Go," Ruth said. "He's waiting." After. That evening, after the guests had gone and the children were in bed, and the house had settled into its particular nighttime quiet, James and Sarah sat on the porch together and did not talk for a long time. The Wyoming sky was doing what the Wyoming sky did best, laying out more stars than any city person was prepared for, vast and indifferent and extraordinarily beautiful. After a while, James said, "Ruth is a good woman." "She's the best person I know," Sarah said, "aside from recent additions." He looked at her. "Recent additions?" he said. "3 of them," she said. "1 grown, 2 small. You may know them." He made the sound that was almost a laugh, but had since the morning of the proposal been a little closer to a real one. They sat. "Margaret's letter," Sarah said. She had been deciding for 2 weeks whether to tell him. She had decided she would, and when, and this was when. "In the primer. I found it when I was organizing the lesson materials." James went still. "I read the first 3 paragraphs," she said. "Before I stopped. I should have brought it to you immediately. I didn't. I've been carrying that." He was quiet for a moment. "What did it say?" he said. "The parts you read," she told him. Not word for word she had memorized it exactly, but that felt like a thing that belonged to him, not a thing to be quoted back precisely. She told him the shape of it, the thing Margaret had known about him and his fear, the thing she had known about Noah, the thing she had said about Emily. James looked at the stars. "She wrote that 3 months before she died," he said. "I didn't know she'd put it there. I didn't know what to do with the primer after I just left it on the shelf." He paused. "She always did things like that. left things in the right place for when they'd be needed. Sarah thought about a woman who had made a quilt from her children's outgrown clothes, who had put up peach preserves so there would be something sweet in winter, who had arranged words in a book for a stranger she would never meet because she knew her family would need a stranger someday, and she wanted to make sure that stranger knew what she was walking into. She was remarkable, Sarah said. She was, James said. And she would have... He stopped, started again. She would have wanted this. Not because she'd have been ready for it, she wouldn't have been ready for me to be happy again. Not right away, she was human, but because she loved those children so much that she would have gotten ready. She would have decided to want this because of them. Sarah looked at him. She already decided, Sarah said. She said so. He turned to look at her. The letter, Sarah said. The last thing I read before I stopped. She said she hoped whoever reads to my children after me is good. And then she said, if you're reading this, you probably already are. James looked at her for a long moment. Then he reached over and took her hand. Not the tentative center of the table reach from the rainy night, a full decided grip, the hand of a man who has stopped negotiating with himself. They sat together on the porch of the Walker Ranch in the last heat of a Wyoming summer, with the stars spread out above them, and the children sleeping inside, and the debt that was being paid down month by month, and the school that would open in the fall, and all of it, all the broken and repaired and growing things belonging to both of them now. Noah's window was open above the porch, and from it, barely audible, came the sound of a boy reading aloud very quietly, so as not to wake his sister, his voice low and steady and careful, moving through the words, the way he moved through everything, one deliberate step at a time. He was reading to himself. But he was reading. Sarah looked at James. James looked up at the window. Neither of them said anything. They didn't need to. Some things don't need witness and commentary and naming. Some things simply need to be sat with, in the quiet, in the good dark, until they become part of what you know to be true. This was a family. Not inherited. Not accidental. Not the family any of them had started with, or planned for, or imagined in the particular ways that people imagine futures when they still believe futures are predictable. Built. One basin of clean water. One driven bracket. One honest answer at a time. Built from the pieces of broken things and willing hands and the stubborn daily undramatic choice to stay. And it was going to hold.